Let's take a look at destructive leadership. How are destructive leaders able to get and maintain power and commit such atrocities and wrongdoings? And why are people their followers? Until very recently, there have been a very few studies on bad leadership. Because of the many visible failures in leadership in the past decade, writing and research designed to explain the nature of destructive leadership have become more prevalent. In the general public and in the academic community, there's a growing demand to understand what destructive leadership is, why it happens, and what to do about it. Destructive leadership has been called a variety of names, including the dark side of leadership, toxic leadership, bad leadership, pseudo-transformational leadership, abusive leadership, and unethical leadership. Common to all of these is the idea that leadership is not always good and helpful, and sometimes it's bad and harmful. Destructive leadership does not exist within a vacuum. It takes root as a result of a complex set of interactions between the leader, the followers, and the context. The toxic triangle outlines the key components that make destructive leadership possible. The primary component of toxic triangle is destructive leaders. Understanding this component is at the core of understanding destructive leadership as a whole. First, destructive leaders typically demonstrate charisma, which is a special quality or charm that appeals to others and enhances the leader's ability to gain people's devotion. Second, destructive leaders have an intense need for power and use this power primarily for personal gain and self-indulgence rather than for the common good. Third, destructive leadership is associated with narcissism. It's not uncommon for destructive leaders to have had negative or traumatic childhood experiences that contribute to treating followers indifferently and exploiting them for their own purpose. A second component of the toxic triangle is susceptible followers. As implied by the name, conformers comply with destructive leaders in an effort to minimize the consequences of not going along. They conform because they lack a clearly defined self-concept and fear what will happen if they don't follow. In contrast, colluders comply in hopes of getting something out for themselves. They support the leader's agenda because it's advantageous to their own. Destructive leadership does not arise only because of bad leaders. It emerges from the interaction between bad leaders and susceptible followers. Followers affect leaders, and leaders affect followers simultaneously. Destructive leaders evolve and can thrive when followers feel the need to conform or collude, and when they feel compelled to attempt to satisfy their needs for safety, uniqueness, and inclusion in a community. The third component of the toxic triangle is conducive environments, which are unique situations or contexts that promote the development of destructive leadership. Institutionalization is a process concerned with making rules and regulations in an organization. Strong institutions can be thought of as organizations in which there are clearly established rules and accepted methods for changing or replacing them. When we think about how not to practice leadership, we aim to restrain toxic leaders or change leadership from destructive to constructive. It's important to discuss how to confront destructive leadership from three perspectives: the leader, the follower, and the context. Taken collectively, these perspectives provide a strong basis for developing strategies to combat destructive leadership. Most of us would agree that it's easy to recognize destructive leaders, but at the same time, it can be very difficult to get rid of them. The task is made more difficult because destructive leaders often possess charisma, which makes them persuasive. They've acquired power, which they like to exhibit, and do so for their own ends. They're also narcissistic, which drastically reduces their ability to be empathetic, underlying all of this psychological need to resolve childhood trauma by treating others abusively. Destructive leaders are hard to deal with, and trying to change them or remove them from positions of leadership is extremely challenging and often impossible. In general, there is no panacea for dealing with destructive leaders. They'll always exist and invariably have an insidious impact on the people and organizations that they serve. In situations where communication or legal channels are available for individuals to express their concerns, it's incumbent on people to speak out, confront the leader, and demand change. This can often be a long process, but because destructive leaders are toxic and abuse power, individuals should not hesitate to challenge them. One route available to followers is to disrupt destructive leadership by speaking out, to be whistleblowers. Followers can better respond to destructive leaders when the cultures they work for reinforce collaboration, employee initiative and involvement, and empowerment. This is because destructive leaders use power unilaterally, in an organizational culture that nurtures participatory involvement can provide a balance that can offset authoritarian power. Furthermore, organizations can build a culture that promotes staff development, particularly programs that focus on advancing the leadership potential of followers. Addressing psychological factors that make followers susceptible to bad leaders can help them develop the capacity to resist destructive leaders. Followers need to convince themselves that they're strong and capable of confronting life's obstacles. To satisfy our needs to feel special and chosen, we do not need to become compliant with a destructive leader. Destructive leaders demand allegiance and devotion to their self-serving goals. Strong influence and support from the outside can give us the security, but we also can engage the strength in ourselves to handle and change and confront the difficulties within us. In situations where there is destructive leadership, followers need to reach within themselves and find the strength to speak truth to power. Groups are important to each of us, but pressure to conform should never get in the way of standing up for good when a leader is destructive. Stopping toxic leaders requires that followers express themselves in confronting and combating the leader. Destructive leadership can be addressed within the context, the norms, rules, and procedures of the organization. One contextual approach that is particularly effective is to create a strong system of checks and balances among different organizational units. Strong checks and balances are conducive to limiting destructive leadership because they require the leader share power with followers and accept being monitored regarding the use of power in any given area. Another contextual approach that can act as a deterrent to destructive leadership is to maintain strong oversight of an organization through the use of independent boards of directors that can have input into how the organization is run. To be able to monitor top executives, it's important that boards of directors be involved in executive selection, performance review, succession, policy level oversight, and the power to sanction executives. To control for abuse, organizations can attempt to monitor themselves by establishing norms and values that create a strong ethical climate within the organization, which helps establish ethical behavior. When organizations encourage values of honesty, respect, and fairness, it becomes less probable that the leader will have the opportunity to act abusively towards followers.